morning, good afternoon, and good night. I'm KT, and this is what happened. Tonight, I have an amazing story of the most successful pirate who has ever lived. During the height of her command, she had over 80,000 men serving her. That's right, I said her, because the most successful pirate was a Chinese woman named Ching Shih. So if you've never heard of Ching Shih, sit back, relax, because wow, do I have a story for you. So let's go over to part 1. Before we go into part 1, I want to apologize upfront for any mispronunciations. The Chinese family of languages is very far outside of this southern United States girl's wheelhouse, but I will put all names on the screen as always. So let's get into part 1, from a harrowing childhood to a pirate queen. Ching Shih, who is also known as Ching Shih, was born around 1775 in China's Guangzhou province. We don't know a whole lot about her childhood, but we do know that that province was poverty-stricken at the time, and around the age of 13, she was forced to enter a life of prostitution to help support her family. It is important to note that she was working on a floating brothel. These are sometimes known as flower boats. These would have been extremely difficult and tragic circumstances for any child. Ching Shih actually thrived as a businesswoman, or at the time a business child. Over the years, she came to be known as shrewd, a great organizer, and it also didn't hurt that she was beautiful and funny and witty. During her time as a sex worker, she actually attracted a lot of high-profile royals. Fast forward 13 years, and Ching Shih is now 26 years old. In the brothel, she meets what would become her husband, infamous pirate lord Ching Shih. He had been busy fighting on behalf of the Vietnamese Tay Son dynasty in the Tay Son Wars. This is interesting because he had been fighting against the Chinese Qing dynasty, but he was immediately impressed by Ching Shih's beauty and most importantly her business savvy, and so he proposed marriage. However, it gets a little murky because some history says she proposed, other history says he did, but I tend to believe that he proposed because she actually had some demands for this marriage. That was, if they were to be married moving forward, 50% of his profits would be hers, and also she would get a part of his fleet. This lady might be after my own heart. He did agree, and the marriage went through. It was after this marriage that she started to be known as Ching Shih. With that, let's go to part 2. Part 2 is called Pirate Alliances. I mentioned earlier that Ching Shih's husband was already a powerful pirate leader. He had about 200 ships at the time of their marriage. However, over the next few years, he used his skills. He seemed to have a unique ability to unify people, and he used her skills as an organizer to grow his pirate forces times 3. During this time, pirates were fractured into gangs in the area, and they were able to convince 6 of these crews to join with them and that they could make more by sticking together versus fighting each other. And these 6 crews bought in. Instead of fighting each other, they focused on attacking large Navy ships, and they defeated several of these forces. And over just a few short years, they were able to go from 200 ships to 600. This included 40,000 men. Now, how did this structure work? It worked because each of the 6 gangs continued to run their own fleets. So there wasn't as much of a struggle for power. They all had different colors. Ching Shih's colors were red flag. Listed on the screen are all of the other gangs and their flag colors. And now that the pirates were unified, they needed a base of operation, and they chose Lantau Island in Hong Kong. This was a strategic pick and a smart one because once they had a base of operations, the pirates were now able to mobilize and raise ships from Hong Kong to Vietnam. This included foreign merchant ships, Qing dynasty naval ships, and all types of foreign vessels. This area used to be a hotbed of pirate activity with pirates fighting each other. Now it was a hotbed of income for pirates. Everything was strategic, and this was largely in part to Ching Shih. We will continue to refer to her as Ching Shih for a little while longer in this video. She helped to set up structures to ensure that more wealth would be made by the pirates. There were a few ways that the pirates decided that they would make money. Number 1, of course, was from the cargo from the raided ships. Sometimes they found gold, silver, spices. All of these things were worth a lot of money. Even tea was worth a lot of money. Some ships carried cotton. Anything on the ship could be valuable. Number 2, they would capture the sailors from the ship. And what they would do was tell the nations of those ships, I will sell you your sailors back. So basically ransom. The third way was charging close by nations to keep their ships safe. If you pay me a fee, then I won't raid your ships. Also, the small islands around. If you pay us a fee, we won't raid your islands. It was a standard protection in exchange for money alignment. This was the start of a new age of piracy in the South China Sea, and this worked wonders for growing the pirate army. But after about 6 years of marriage, Ching Shih died in a typhoon off of the coast of Vietnam somewhere. This tragic event marked the rise of Ching Shih as a pirate leader. Let's go on to part 3. Part 3, something like a queen. Now Ching Shih becomes Ching Shih, and she is running this pirate fleet. So what does she do next? Well, she finds someone to marry. And we've got to talk about this guy because he was something like a stepson to her, but not really. So her former husband, who is now deceased, had taken a hostage years ago. And this hostage, they say, became like a son to him. And his name was Chung Po Sai. They enter into a relationship together after her husband dies, and she grants control of the Red Fleet to him because she had other things to focus on, namely growing the pirate confederation. Now remember, they had about 600 junk boats at this time, and junk doesn't mean junk like trash. That was just the name of the ship, and about 40,000 men. During this time, her home province of Guangzhou was really booming in population. This was very important because the farming demand could not keep up with the population boom, meaning people were not fed and were hungry. It made it easier to recruit young men into piracy, and this is something we talked about when we did the Black Pirates of the Caribbean. Sometimes desperation leads you to make different types of choices that are outside of societal norms boxes. So again, with her new man leading the Red Fleet and her out recruiting tough, she was out there in those fields, honey, and streets recruiting people. They very quickly grew from 40,000 men to 80,000 men, and now they had 1,000 junk boats. And those were just the large ones. They also had 800 small boats. That was the entirety of the pirate confederation. And I need you to understand the scope of what Ching Shih had built. The largest of this woman's ships weighed almost 600 tons. That may not mean much to you, so let me explain that it could carry 300 to 400 men, and it had up to 30 mounted weapons. But the big thing is, because of this growing success, the pirate allies were less likely to leave because everybody was fed, everyone had a few coins, and everything was looking good. Even the Qing dynasty decided that they could not continue to fight the pirate confederation, so they decided we'll just negotiate with them because they didn't even have enough money to pay them off. Ching Shih was also very smart. She knew that it was kind of unheard of for a woman pirate to be a captain or a commander over an entire fleet. However, it was not unusual for women to be pirates. Some of them fought, some of them were cooks. They had different roles in the pirate world. So at the beginning of her rule, she set up rules that would reinforce her leadership, but also served purposes elsewhere. Number one, a pirate could not desert. They couldn't go on leave without permission or go on shore. This would ensure that men didn't just desert the army because a woman was leading. The punishment for this was slitting your ears. Also, you could be executed if you were a repeat offender. When the pirates were raiding ships, the actual raiding party got to keep a fifth of the booty or the treasure. That was divided up amongst the raiders, but the other 4/5 went to the general pirate bucket. Basically, all the other pirates got to divide up equally what remained. So this ensured that if you were on the raiding party, you were incentivized because you got more. However, just for being a pirate, you were guaranteed to get something. Also, if you were caught hiding goods that you got from a raid from the other pirates so that it wouldn't be divided equally, you were whipped. And if you continued to do this, you were executed. The rape or assault of a female captive was punishable by death because we weren't going to be abusing women over here and a woman is leading the charge, honey. But you could buy a captured woman. I think it would be the equivalent of $40 now, but it was only to be your wife. You could not then take her and sell her to another man or to a prostitution house or flower boat. Depending on where they were raiding at, sometimes they would actually pay the townspeople. But this, of course, depended on where you were because sometimes they were taking ransom from islands, but other times, depending on where they were, they would actually pay them. Ching Shih had this big fleet. Remember, there were other leaders under this confederation, and so there were different fighting tactics, but they were all distinctive, and it made them highly successful against even big naval forces like the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, and so many more. One thing the pirates would do was sometimes set fires to old ships, and then they could use it to help them surround other ships to be more easily captured. It would basically serve to block the path so that they couldn't easily escape. They were also known to take these extremely long poles and tie knives or machetes to the end of them. And I don't know how effective this was at harming people because the poles were reported reported to be 20, 30 feet long, but it definitely was a scary sight. And intimidation counts. They also used these rifles called jingals. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but they were extremely long. I don't know how they were holding those things. They would also pose as part of naval fleets, and they would just put in requests from the government for cannons, and they would get them. And I just thought that was crazy, but ingenious. Once they boarded ships, they would use various forms of hand-to-hand combat as well. We've already established that the Pirate Confederation worked for hire, so at some point they actually allied with the British. Baby, the British wanted that silk, they wanted that porcelain. Y'all know how this goes. They weren't going to be able to colonize China, but they would get the goods any way they could. And of course, for the British, tea was also a big thing. One thing that the British did was trade opium into the region for these goods. The Chinese government did not like this, and they banned the trade. And of course, why would they want the British to put more opium into a region in exchange for these goods? That creates addictions. Even the East India Company, which was a force to be reckoned with at the time, found it beneficial to just negotiate with the pirates in the South China Sea. The pirates had won all types of great victories because now they were over 80,000 men deep. They also had over 1,200 ships. And this was just the Red Fleet. This did not include all of the ships that were under the other flags. We already know that there were over 2,000 ships in the entire fleet. And having 1,200 ships was amazing. And just so you understand, let's use a pirate you have heard of. Let's talk Blackbeard. You've been taught that Blackbeard was the pirate of all pirates. But at the height of his command, he had 4 or 5 ships and 300 to 400 men. It does not even compare. Not at all. But all good things must come to an end. And after a few years of ruling, the pirates did start to have more infighting. And the Chinese government was actually in active negotiations with Ching Shih. She finally came to terms with them so that the piracy could end for her. And let's be clear, the British had allied with the Portuguese trying to bring down this pirate confederacy. The Chinese government couldn't do it. Nobody could do it. And so they had to get these negotiations underway. And Ching Shih was smart. She knew she couldn't be a pirate forever. So the Qing dynasty actually offered pardons to any pirate who would just surrender. One of the other major allies in the Pirate Confederation had actually turned, and he had gotten a full pardon and actually joined the Qing Navy. The government actually found out that these pirates were drawn to a quiet retirement. A lot of them actually didn't want to be pirates forever. In the end, they granted amnesty to over 17,000 pirates. They turned over their junk boats, over 200 boats, to the emperor. In these negotiations, I have to say, Our Lady came out really good. Her new man, Chiang Po-sai, was actually allowed to go into the imperial army. Because he was respectable and hardworking, he was able to move up. At that time, Ching Shih asked for some titles to complement her husband's, but because she was a remarried widow, she was not allowed to do that. But she referred to herself as his wife anyway and gave herself the titles that she wanted to have. And in 1822, when he passed away, she actually opened a gambling house in Macau, and she also dabbled in the salt trade. Unbelievably, she made more money in her retirement than she did in all of her years of piracy. She died around the age of 69 of old age, and she was surrounded by friends and family. With her second husband, she had up to 3 children, and so she had family, she had wealth, she had prestige at that time, she had happiness. What more could a woman ask for? So let's go into part 4, my final thoughts. Let's get into my final thoughts. It's hard to know where to start because I never heard of Ching Shih. For references, I used the public broadcasting station, their website, and a source called Atlas Obscura. What Ching Shih did was amazing, and how she built herself, her wealth, and the people around her. Because one thing I noticed with her, did she come out rich? Yes, but she bought up the people around her with her, the people who were willing to put the work in and do the job. And she was such an amazing organizer. I would call her a strategist. She had a strategy for everything, and she used it to the benefit of the Pirate Confederation to even build that. And her first husband seemed to be what I would call a visionary. As my father used to say, there are some people who can look at the world and see what's possible, and other people can only see what's there. And there's nothing wrong with either view, but I do believe that her husband, Ching Shih, was one of those people who could see what could be, because to go from a group of people that are worn to first taking a wife and lifting her up and respecting her and seeing the unique skill set she had and using it, not against her, but to work with you to build up this confederation generation was probably pretty novel. I don't know about the cultural section of that part of the world at the time, but definitely where I'm from, that was not the norm. This was in 1801 when he met her. So keep that in mind. But also, how smart would she have been to be able to go from being a sex worker to being over all of these pirates? When her husband died, she could have easily been booted out. I mean, look at how many men were under her, and even serving under the other pirate flags, they could have easily removed her. And I'm sure all of the men didn't like it. However, they fell in line for a time, and they were successful for following her. This story also shows me that history sometimes will try to erase the achievements of women and minorities, because we talked about this when we talked about Black pirates rising. Piracy in movies and a lot of media that we see has been largely whitewashed and male washed, but being a woman and being a pirate was not unusual. She was only unusual because she was a commander and she ran the fleet. And to know that Blackbeard is one of the most heard of pirates in history, and he only had 4 or 5 ships, 300 or 400 men, and she had, I don't even know how many times that is. The biggest thing I learned is that Ching Shih, also known as Ching Shih, was the most successful pirate that I could find in history, and that was by any measure you could think of. So I guess to wrap everything up, though your background and where you come from affects you and builds you into the person you become, your background being negative does not mean that your entire life will be negative. A lot of people come from challenging backgrounds. The world will tell you that you can never be more than what you came from. Ching Shih shows us that that's not true. You can be what you set your mind to be, because she came from nothing. She did what she needed to do. She was the best at it. And it leads me to the adage, whatever you choose to do, be the best at it. So the next time someone is telling you about Peg Leg or Blackbeard, Calico Jack, or even Francis Drake, you tell them about Ching Shih. And with that, until next time, remember, keep learning, be happy, and always have a blessed day. Bye bye.